Hey everybody, what up? All right, so in this video, I'm talking about Django. Django 5 just recently got released, and I'm really happy that this project is still around. I'm actually quite shocked, honestly, that I mean, it's a great project, but you typically just don't see things last for very long in the web development world, and and there's so many different web frameworks out there. It's I find it amazing that it's still around, and I've always loved Django. My days with Django pretty much got me into web development. So long story short, I was trying to make a website about a rock music. It was a rock music website. It kind of got me into. I didn't kind of. It got me into programming, and I was trying to start a business. Spent multiple years trying to do that, and then finally got myself into the industry as a software developer. Started at the very bottom, worked my way all the way up to staff tech lead, and hopefully continue to move up. And Django, though, was a big reason why all of that ended up happening for me. When I was first getting started, there was a lot of different discussions. I would go to like Stack Overflow, should I be using Perl or Python or PHP? And like I was trying to basically use everything, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the best method would be. And I think a lot of us beginners do that because programming is difficult, especially back then. I mean, we had less tools than we do now, and I don't think it's any less difficult actually now. Even with more tools, it's just you raise the bar. I've mentioned that so many times. But I think, you know, the investment of time and energy and effort and all that goes into learning how to code definitely gives beginners pause of like, hey, am I learning the right thing? Is this going to pay off? Like, am I going to get a job doing this? Like, there was all those discussions. Is it going to be around? Is it scalable? I remember like reading all this stuff about whether or not something was scalable. I didn't have a remote understanding of what that actually meant. And then eventually I just started pushing forward. And so I jumped around a lot between like Perl. I think I used something called like, it was like Perl LMP or something like that. Is it LMP? Yeah, it was LWP. Yeah, the LWP, man, 2002. But yeah, these Perl CGI scripts, I miss Perl actually. Just the days, like the wide-eyed stuff. I mean, this was a really rough language to learn, but I think if you came from like C, C++, then Perl just made web development so much better, and then PHP made it a little bit easier. PHP borrowed a lot of its sigils and stuff from Perl. Perl basically revolutionized regular expressions in programming language. It was great for scripting and scraping the web and everything. But it wasn't great for web development, in my opinion. And then I found PHP just, you know, too difficult. The projects were so large, and there's so many different files, and there was all this just injectable PHP all over the place. It was a mess. So I basically jumped into Django early on, and I was very beginner, and I was struggling with Django. Django has a little bit of a learning curve, and it's very opinionated about certain things. And I found that very difficult as a beginner, at least so I thought. But basically at that time, everything was difficult. And I remember I spent some time, I moved over to this Web2Py framework, and Web2Py, like, it definitely looks dated now, but there was a period of time where this project was sort of taking off and could have given Django possibly a run for its money, but it just didn't have the developer support. It had a very good ecosystem. In fact, like, yeah, definitely it had a very good ecosystem. The guy that created it was Massimo Di Piero. I remember we were Facebook friends for a while, then eventually I stopped using Facebook and got rid of all these people that I don't really know, because it's kind of weird when you're sharing pictures of your kids and stuff and you don't really know this person. Yeah, that was like the advent of Facebook, where everybody's like, hey, I should friend everybody I've ever known in my life, and God, that was a disaster. But something clicked, I think, a few years ago, maybe like 5, and I'm like, who are these people? I don't. And then, you know, you obviously get people posting all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's just weird. So bottom line, I ended up deleting him, and I just checked him out tonight, actually, because it's been so long since I looked at this project. And he's actually working now. He was a professor at DePaul University in Chicago at the time, and it turns out he's actually a lead software engineer for SpaceX at this point. I should reach back out to him. But yeah, I hope he's doing well. That's pretty awesome that, you know, somebody creates this project, professor, and like, yeah, this thing didn't work out, but it had potential for a while. But man, it looks rough now. So I don't even know if they're even running this thing anymore. Yeah, they're talking about Python 2.7 and stuff. Interesting. But yeah, Bruno and a couple of other people that work with that project, I hope they're all doing well. But anyway, so I jumped off of Web2Py as I realized like it had some limitations early on, and I went back to Django. And it was at that point, pretty early in my development, that like I truly was able to take it and run with it. And I created a lot of websites with it. Really kind of kickstarted my YouTube channel with it, and definitely made me fall in love with Python. And then I ended up getting a job as a C# developer. So all that said, man, all these years later, I still love Django. I have a couple of tutorials on my CodeHawk website around it. I'd like to go ahead and revisit and see what sort of new things they got. But one of the biggest selling points is like for any sort of content, like any sort of content moderation website, like I need to mute this real quick. So it was great for anything content related. So all these blogs, everybody was like, hey, use WordPress or something like that. Like I found Python to be just Python and Django to be so much better. Like they had the built-in admin here. This admin was great as far as like just out of the box, almost like a PHP admin or PG admin, just a good user interface, like right there. And then just everything from like the migrations, the object relational mapper, everything just seemed to work so much better right out of the box, and you didn't have to write a bunch of custom code. And even to this day, I find with tools like, you know, Passport, or I don't even know if we're using Passport as much anymore. But any tools, like if you're working with Mongo or any of that stuff, like with the Node ecosystem, it still lacks, I think, the basic tools that would make a content-based website easy to manage and work with. And Django still does that better, I feel like, than pretty much anybody. All right, so in this video, let's go ahead and talk. I gotta stop playing the audio here, but anyway, yeah, I definitely miss it. I should spend some more time with it. When we talk about like content sites, it seems like pretty much everything is a content site. Like a content site meaning that like if you have content, you're displaying it. So that could be anything from, I want to say e-commerce. That would probably be one example of a content site that this didn't really work out with. Like Django tried to have something called like Satchmo and a few other things. So Django couldn't really hit the e-commerce market very well, in my opinion. But if you were going to create any sort of blog, or if it was a movie website, something like Rotten Tomatoes, or anything that's compiling data, or even a chatbot, really, for that matter, you know, Django definitely was not the fastest framework, but like pretty much anything that you have to have content moderation, I feel like Django definitely exceeds even now. Another great thing with Django is that they've always been very much in tune with like backwards compatibility. And then they're very good at documentation. So when things break, they'll tell you how to upgrade. They also have a good release schedule. So like, you know how to, or how long it's going to actually be in support for. So it kind of reminds me of what made Perl so special back in the day, is that new versions of Perl would come out, and then you would, so this talks about deprecation, but anyway, new versions of Perl would come out and you would have no problem updating to the latest because it wouldn't break everything. And that's something that we struggle with in this development world, even decades later, right? We've always been trying to figure out how to handle backwards compatibility, but with the Node ecosystem, like every little package updating because of some security release or something, and then, you know, it breaks all kinds of different projects, and you have dependencies that break. And Django is, I think, has been very good in regards to minimizing that sort of effort. Now, it's not exactly easy. I've definitely struggled having Django projects and trying to upgrade them to the latest, but I think if you're only one or two versions behind, you're probably pretty safe. If you're like Django 2.8 for Python 2.7 and you're trying to go to like 3.8, you're going to have a rough time. Really, any Python 2 to 3 is going to be a rough time. And that actually kind of reminds me of that whole Python fiasco of 3.0. Like there was a lot of things that they decided to change, and it really pissed off the Python community, but it was able to survive, which is very interesting, because if I think about it with Perl, they did the same thing when it came to Perl 6. So they basically decided to create this new Perl 6. They've now rebranded it to Raku, so they don't even call it Perl 6 anymore. But it was Perl's downfall because it it tried to do what basically what Python tried to do, but it failed. And the community was already sort of losing support for Perl. And then all these crazy backwards compatible things that they just threw out the window. It really pissed off the Perl community. And I think a lot of Perl people have now since left. And that's unfortunate. Larry Wall was a linguist, definitely an icon in the computer software industry. He's up there with Guido van Rossum, but sadly this project isn't anywhere. It just doesn't bring enough, I think, uniqueness or anything that it doesn't really excel in anything that I'm aware of. And if you're going to switch to something brand new, it has to just be, it has to be like revolutionary, a lot of new features, or it has to excel in features that other languages and libraries have. And I feel like with Perl 6, it just never really did that. So yeah, that's about it. I mean, Django came out in 2003. It was originally started by a newspaper company in Kansas. Washington Post was using it for their content for a while. A lot of websites have used it. They've outgrown it. Things like Pinterest. I know Pinterest was using it initially, but these, as you grow larger, sometimes you just kind of create your own framework as time goes on. But it's always been between like Django and Rails for the longest time. Django was made as Python's response to Ruby and Rails like blowing up. Python and Django have always said has an edge because with Python, there's so much other stuff you can do with it, whether it's like web scraping, scripting stuff, basic video games, server-side stuff, obviously machine learning, artificial intelligence. Whereas Ruby on Rails, like you're doing Ruby to basically do Rails web development. They're both still great web frameworks, but I've always chosen Django for that reason, that you could always do more with Python than you could with Ruby. So we'll see where things go, but I've used pretty much every web framework out there, and if I compare something like ASP.NET to Django, I would choose Django any day of the week if I could. And it's always been a pleasure to work with. So that's really my thoughts on it. I love Django. I'm always gonna love it. It's always gonna be a big part of my developer roadmap and just inspiration and everything else. So, all right, everybody, have a good night. Take care. Bye. If you're learning to code, I recommend you check out my website, codehawk.com. My courses are fast, to the point, without the fluff that you'll find on other competitor sites like Pluralsight and Udemy. One of the reasons why you'll want to learn with me is that I'm a self-taught engineer myself. I never went to school for any of this stuff. I've been doing it for over a decade now professionally. The biggest reason you should use CodeHawk is that it's one price for everything. I try to make this as affordable as possible. Instead of having to purchase 15 to 20 different courses on Udemy or an expensive monthly subscription to Pluralsight, it's one price for everything on CodeHawk. Front end, back end, full stack. It has courses on all the latest web development technology. The courses range from beginner to advanced. So if you want to learn the latest web technology, give CodeHawk a look. There's demos for all of the courses that are out there right now. In addition, there's also my personal vlogs, which I'll be adding more to. So content that I don't release to YouTube is available on CodeHawk.